This is getting to be historic moments for me. 2014 will be my 50th year in education policy. I started in Washington in 1964 with the Bureau of the Budget. So a lot of this is, I'll talk a little bit about some of the evolution of some of these policies from that standpoint. But this is really a talk about what is. I'm not here to advocate or sell anything at this point. It's really what has been done in California and what the implications are, as we indicated, for data and research. So it's a what is talk. I'm going to describe to you what we'll be facing as researchers and data people. And then we can talk about the implications and people's view, I'm sure, about whether what has been wrought is good or bad. So I think that this all comes out of a period of intensive policy action where we passed something called the Local Control Funding Formula, which abolished about 40 categorical programs, freed up a lot of flexibility in that sense, and also created a new local accountability program and plan. I'll talk about that. And also a new set of state outcomes and processes for accountability. And so that was a very long law, had many, many things in it. And then we also, of course, have been very aggressive as any state at the top of the level of the states in terms of implementing Common Core with a unified backing of most of our major parts of the political system. The first big sign of opposition to that was the California Republican Convention came out against the Common Core, but at this point that's not a significant roadblock with 2/3 Democrats. So the Common Core and the rollout of those policies, which I talked about earlier, affects almost everything in terms of our policies, and you'll see some of these ripple effects throughout. So let me get started then. This is more of a descriptive look at what we have. The Common Core and the local control funding system, my thesis is that it will disrupt and transform many databases and trend analysis. That in terms will have strong implications for research as well, both for data analysis, but also for, I'll talk a lot about implementation analysis and things of that sort. So some of the historic things that have been at the center of California are now history. The California Standards Test was administered for the last time in the spring of 2013, and so we're moving to the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And the Academic Performance Index, and the index had only, as you know, test scores in it, is now part of an extensive moldable measurement system, which I will lay out in the forthcoming slides. And third, the new local finance system creates local, each school district will have to have a local accountability plan. You'll hear more about an acronym called LCAP, and that's the Local Control Accountability Program. And this will require the districts to link resource allocation to the 8 state priority outcomes, which I will come to later. So it's an attempt to redo budgeting, which has been pretty much a green eye shade operation around inputs in big buckets like instruction and so on, and to make that more of a plan that meets outcome goals. So there's a fair amount of new and untried concepts here, and I'll be more specific about that as we go along. So I'm just going to, this is not a talk about the Common Core, but one of the things about disruption of things in terms of research and data is how different it is. This is a slide I got from Linda Darling Hammond, and she went through and looked at some of the key words that are used in the Common Core math standards. And you'll see these are quite ambitious. They're different than what we had in our prior curricular frameworks. They are different than what we attempted to assess in what's called the California Standards Test. And it's quite a move in terms of what we're trying to lift the system to do. So I think these are self-evident, and I'll let people look at it there. Obviously, any assessment that will do this and driving a system towards these things will be difficult and have many profound consequences. On the English language arts and learning, more emphasis on nonfiction. One of the things about Common Core is that it is more aligned with college readiness. The 11th grade final assessment will give an indicator as to whether students are ready for post-secondary education, including career and technical education, without need for further remediation. Students will get markers probably in the 8th and 5th grade as to whether they're on a track for college readiness. So we have linked our standards to post-secondary education, and something we did not as a country or as a state do last time, and we have much more participation by higher ed. The nonfiction brings up higher ed in my mind because the biggest complaint of Cal State U was these kids are much stronger in reading novels and literary things, even poetry, than they are in nonfiction informational reading. We give them a child development study and that sort of thing, and they have trouble dissecting it, and so we need a better balance between those two. So that's part of what we're moving to. Other complaint of higher ed and others was that too much of what students do is their own opinions, not based on any facts or analysis, and so we want their work to be much more tied to the use of sources, and they can have an opinion, but they also have to have some understanding of what the background is in that regard. Moreover, the Common Core envisions much more linkage between history and social studies and science, where those subject matters would be responsible for some of the focus on nonfiction and informational reading. So we're trying to draw in students and faculty from across the areas. The prior two slides and more I'll show is it's going to be very hard to extrapolate from how kids are doing on the California Standards Test to the new Smarter Balanced Assessment system that we're putting in 215 in a final way. I'll come back to that theme. So the Smarter Balanced Assessment will include performance assessments. There's people in this room working on those performance assessments. One that we're circulating is a performance assessment on nuclear power, where students would have to read various sources and perspectives on that, and then come up with their recommendation for what would be a sensible approach to nuclear power. They could again formulate an opinion, but that would be tied back and forth. So the performance exam idea is roughly the difference between the driver's test, where you take a multiple choice exam and then you get behind the wheel and you actually have to park the car, which I had trouble with at age 16 and still have my wife park for me. So that's generally the help we have there. Extended responses and multiple choice through a computer adaptive engine. So we will be moving then. This is another challenge for data analysis. as you computer adaptive, as you answer questions that are easier for you, we shift you to harder ones. As you answer questions that you're not doing well in, we shift you to easier questions. And so in some ways, each student will be taking his or her own test, will be able to probe a lot more, for example, what the high end knows, because they hit the ceiling on the existing multiple choice tests. And we also had to cluster lots of items around cut points, proficient, basic, below basic. Now that'll be less so under this design. And so this computer adaptive engine will be a challenge for the schools. I was down in a San Jose school district, and they tried to use the iPad for this and didn't work. They had to get keyboards, and then the kids would write the answers out because they weren't that good at typing them in, and then they had to type them in, and so now they're doing keyboarding in kindergarten in Franklin McKinley School District. So there's going to be some adaptations and glitches. I hope it won't be anything like Obama's health care plan, but there'll be some I think discontinuity in data just from implementing such a complex system. The average school in California has the average bandwidth of a family, and there's more bandwidth, more kids in school there is in a family. So there's this intense race to create bandwidth and create all of the other things that are needed to implement this. So there's going to be a hiatus and an interim period where I think validity and reliability will be an issue. The Smarter Balanced Assessment will create different clusters and domains of skills and applications. Because of the first slides I showed you on English language arts and math, obviously it's not going to be the same kind of printout as you got from the California Standards Test, where you had breakouts as to what students did well on which parts of the test. Those will be all different, or significantly different. Moreover, the state law called AB 484 prohibits for the state to link Smarter Balance to the CST trends. It's in the law. Now, I'm sure some economists will try and do this, but I hope so, right? So we'll see how that works, but if it's going to be done, it won't be done through any official state databases. So how are California students doing over time? I don't know whether we'll be able to calculate this. Somehow NAEP has been able to keep a core of questions since the 1970s, I guess, and they have this trend line that's still going on. And we have no plans to do that. I'm not sure how you would do it in this regard, but at this point, that's up for grabs. Moreover, in a heartening thing, if you like, Common Core, we're getting considerable amount of support and alignment from our higher education. This will create more support for higher education, and opponents of Common Core will be running into the higher education establishment. The head of the College Board, which contracts for the SAT exam, David Coleman, was one of the 4 lead authors of the Common Core standards, and he was hired right after that job to head College Board. He is realigning in 215 the SAT with Common Core. What that'll look like, I'm not sure. There was a sneak preview in the New York Times education supplement, about 6 months ago. It looks very different. ACT is really coming out of the box. I met with their president, and they are going to have a Common Core aligned ACT in fall of 2014. So they will be out there ahead of even Smarter Balanced, and they will be aggressively selling their version of assessment to states. Alabama has already indicated they will use the ACT instrument. 11 states now require all students to take the ACT in their state I was out in Illinois, and they found significant number of students who did well in their ACT and had no intentions of applying or going to any college. And this is one of the reasons that they've been doing it. So ACT will have a version out there of this. And so how that will affect their trend lines of SAT and ACT, they've been going back forever. You know, the SAT goes up a point, and it's up so much from the 1972 version and so on. I'm not a testing expert. Ed Hartle emailed me. He couldn't make the meeting today, but to me that will be challenging. And then the University of California Board of Admissions, which this California State University also accepts those standards. They have standards called A to G. A to G are the requirements of UC: 4 years of English, 3 years of math, laboratory science for 2 years, and so on. In California, the University of California approves the high school courses that meet A to G. And the new head of BORS, Board of Admissions at UC system-wide, is a big Common Core enthusiast. He's a mechanical engineering professor. And they are realigning all their A to G high school course approvals in California to align with Common Core. So that's another movement. So how that will change and influence things, I don't know, but that's obviously something to watch in that regard. And then there was no revision of the high school exit exam, which is not part of the state testing system that we really did major surgery on, which I will give you a hint I will give you some overview next. But it's possible that we will come up with a new high school exit exam. We will come up with a new high school exit exam. It's possible that it could be computer-based. Since the computer's shifting you lower and lower as you don't know stuff, there could be part of a standard that's set as high school exit at the bottom of the computer adaptive, as well as at the top, which is so-called career and college ready. So that will change in that regard. So if you start looking at this, you wonder about how you're going to run teacher evaluation systems statewide. We do not have, we have a law called the Stull Act passed in 1971, which requires the use of student attainment and achievement data, but it's up to each local district to bargain it, so we're not a state that has a state law. But states have been implementing teacher evaluation systems based on their older tests, and since 45 states still claim they are moving to a new assessment, whether it's ACT, well, it's more than Texas is using a new assessment, so it's 46. It's their own in that regard. So it seems to me that. Looking at it from a California standpoint, if you've been using CST tests for teacher evaluation, then Smart or Balanced will have, quote, different proficiency levels and concepts. How would you put in a performance exam? And I think part of the idea of performance exams, and there's people here that know more than I do about this, is there'll be some aspects of teacher scoring. And America has never trusted their teachers to score anything. I mean, England and other places have teachers that score exams, but we trust the machines. And again, a area of uncertainty will be how will people evaluate teacher scoring of, if that nuclear power example I gave you just can't score that totally on a computer in that regard. So. That's one thing that concerns the teacher evaluation groups. Now let's look at our trend line. So in California, in 2013 we gave the CST. In 2014 spring, we will give a field test of the Smart or Balanced assessment. That field test is the test of a test there's a whole lot of new items, thousands and thousands of new items that are out there. Some of these items won't work in terms of their intended purposes, so you're testing the items during this assessment. There will be no scores that will be computed for individual pupils. Smarter Balanced will be looking at this strictly, the field test, as a way to form their levels, like college and career ready. So they're not interested in individual scores. There will be no reports to parents about how little Johnny is doing. Your academic performance index, the state accountabilities indicator, will be carried over from 213 to 214. Just whatever you had in 213, you have in 214, and in that regard. So that's 214. 215 is your baseline of assessment for Smarter Balanced assessment. If there aren't a few computer glitches in this, I'll be surprised. We've got 1,000 school districts, 10,000 schools, and 310,000 teachers. Not all of those will be tested, but it's a massive system. And if you're up in the Siskiyou somewhere, it might be a push to get all this computer assessment going. So that's 215, but that will be a baseline, and we will report those results by school district and school, and send things to parents. So your first real movement from a baseline will be 216. So how are you going to evaluate teachers on tests between now and then? I don't know. I mean, LA Unified, and there's a group of districts called core districts, 8 largely urban districts. So they're going to have to figure that out. And then how long a trend line would you think would be reasonable? Would you want to evaluate teachers in high stakes right away in 216 after the 215 field test, or not? So that's an issue. All of that has made the State Board of Education wary of an NCLB waiver. Essentially our negotiations with the Obama administration over the NCLB waiver broke down over two issues. They wanted a state-specified teacher evaluation system for every school, that's 10,000 schools in the state, by a year before Obama was to leave office. And that is right in the middle of this transition period, and the judgment of the board was this isn't a great time to do that with a great deal of statewide specification. Moreover, they wanted 3 different accountability systems that we would specify in the next 3 years. And as you'll see, our accountability systems are really in transition, and I'll get to that later. So we were wary of that. So I'm frankly not optimistic that we'll get too far with that one. Now, we had a panoply of assessments in California, many of which are in suspension. Doesn't mean they won't be brought back someday, but right now in the new law called Assembly Bill 484, they are, quote, suspended during this period. Now, America, of course, got really hung up that if you have a test, you have to test every pupil. In one of my incarnations as State Board of Education president in the 70s, we had a view that the schools were the unit of accountability, and you could matrix sample schools and get an accountability score. That went by the boards, and our system that we built here that is now in suspension was every pupil was tested in whatever test we gave. Okay, so we have cut back temporarily to the NCLB minimum with a few exceptions. What is the NCLB minimum? Grades 3 through 8 and one grade in high school, which we will use as grade 11, which is, quote, college and career ready. So we tested in grade 2, that is suspended. We tested in grade 9 and 10, that is suspended. We never did test in grade 12, so there's nothing to suspend. But then we had a lot of end-of-course tests, which are all suspended. Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, world history, U.S. history, physics, biology, chemistry. So those assessments, which were given to secondary school students, are also at this point suspended. And the law says that we shall come back with a comprehensive assessment plan to the legislature in 2016. So there'll be a hiatus here of these assessments, and people have been using some of these for data analysis. And even if we do them, we'll redo some, I'm sure. One, they may be matrix sampled to schools. And two, we may not do them in all subjects that we had been doing them in. So we'll see. There may be other alternatives to those that we can do, but at this point, there's the plans there. So that there's quite a bit of disruption there. Now, the accountability system under the local control funding formula plan. It came out with 8 state priorities. So now this is a system of, quote, multiple measures. So what we currently have, pupil achievement, is in the fourth bullet there. And then there's all these others. These are in the statute. So accountability now is much transformed. As you can see, some of these are inputs, some of these are processes like pupil engagement, and some of them are outcomes. Now, I don't know how you put these into a single number or a summative number. It's sort of like building a smoothie. You put the apples and the lemons and the bananas and you throw it in a machine and you have a drink and you give it a number. There's a lot of people in the legislature still want a single number. Right now, API is 8. You're on a scale of 2 to 1,000, and real estate agents all have the number of the local school. This one's a 712, that one's a 680, and so on. So this is going to challenge the real estate brokers to figure out how to rate the local schools as the parents come in from Wisconsin or something. So these are the Williams requirements are merely legal requirements that students must have some instructional materials and a teacher with credentials, and it has some minimum requirements on school buildings. So I can read you some of what's underneath these if you're interested in all that. And the last bullet here, I think it does refer to the suspended end of course tests and so on that I indicated before. So that's, quote, if available in terms of what those will do. So that are now the 8 state priorities. So one of our professors, Ed Hartle, heads the Public School Accountability Advisory Group for us. He'll have to figure out how to define these and his group and how to put them together. So you've gone from a bunch of tests to all this, and that'll change whatever kind of analysis one does. So now on to the local control accountability. So you saw the 8 state priorities. So the law says that the district budget, so there's a lot of, first of all, there's a lot of decentralization to the district level. And at that point, the districts will have more flexible money. They'll be getting more money. Alum Rock, here, which is a suburb of San Jose, a part of San Jose actually, it's east of San Jose. They get about $8,000 per pupil, and when it's all done with a concentration factor in the school finance formula, they have very concentrated poverty. They'll go from $8,000 to $12,500 over the next 6 to 8 years. So you're talking about some real money for them. So they are required to come up with a local control accountability, how to spend all their money, and they're supposed to link the district budget back to the 8 state priorities. So you'll have a different kind of budget discussion going on and a different kind of thinking around resource allocation at the local level. So that might be something for people to study. They can follow the money. Another area of concern is, does the state supplemental funding for low-income pupils, for English learners, and foster children, do they get the money? It's going to be dumped into the district coffers. The state board's supposed to come up with some requirements on how the supplemental funding is going to be spent. We will come up with those requirements next year. And so that issue arises and is of intense concern to, for example, civil rights groups around the state. And then the local control accountability requires school site plans as well. We've been doing this with something called, we've been not doing it, but reporting on school level things through something called a school accountability report card. That is very hard to work with. It was part of Proposition 98. It's called a SARC quote. So we're going to revise that and have a better system of local school reporting. The current one is festooned with 45 categories, and it's hard to find on the websites of the school districts, and it's very hard to deal with it right now. So that'll also be reworked. But part of this is a movement towards local control and local accountability and local politics. And it is a fairly big gamble in terms of what the locals will do with new money and more flexible money, and how this will all fit together with their local control accountability program and the state accountability 8 priorities. So that brings me down to some lost art, I guess, which Milbrey McLaughlin couldn't be here today. She and I used to practice this art, which is called implementation research, where you don't try and follow databases. You don't have databases. But the issues that I'm most concerned about right now are, how is this going implementation-wise? I mean, you can see the challenges here that are going on. So how do I find out how implementation's going? I've got 10,000 schools out there to look at of all varieties and types, 1,000 school districts. So how do I understand that? We know from prior research that local schools may lack capacity and will to implement things, so what do they need in capacity and will? And we also know from Milbrey's research that the school districts and the state mutually adapt these policies over time so that it's somewhere in between where it started and somewhere short of where people wanted it to go when they initially passed these laws. So you get these adaptations in the middle. So we're in need of that kind of data very soon. But that's new data, and somebody's going to have to go out and collect it in some systematic way. Right now, all I get is informal, unrepresentative sample feedback from people at meetings or professional groups or so on. The Common Core will require, among other things, a huge, deep professional development workout. This is not going to be done by the usual mechanisms of brief meetings with teachers and so on. Most teachers are aware of it, of Common Core. Overwhelmingly, they're aware of it. They've tried a few instructional units, but they're saying they haven't had enough professional development. Nobody would be surprised about that. So it would be good to have some definition of what good professional development would be, and how deep it is, and how many teachers have depth, and how would I even measure it? I don't know that research paradigm exists, but it's something we desperately need to know. It's also the history of America, and recent education policy has been we increase more rapidly and dramatically accountability without increasing as rapidly or deeply a capacity building. So the scales don't match, and so this depth of professional development is one of the areas that we're concerned about. Most legislators that I've talked to rightly have a skeptical view of professional development. They've funded it over the years, haven't seen much for it, don't think it's very well designed sometimes, so we're going to have to do better. The effective teaching strategies for Common Core and meeting the 8 state goals, student engagement is one of the 8 state priorities, are unclear. Even though 73% of the teachers say they support and are enthusiastic about Common Core. So this at this point, Common Core at least doesn't seem at this stage like one of these things that's coming top down that the teachers don't want. At every step of the political process, the California Teachers Association lobbied in favor of the local control funding formula and of the Common Core. The governor provided $1.25 billion in one-time funds to implement the Common Core in this current school year. It doesn't mean there won't be more, but there may not be more. Who knows? And so I think that's something else we need to know. And lastly, longitudinal implementation studies. In my early days, I did with a student of mine, we followed 14 years of Title I. I was the second person hired in the Title I ESEA office in 1965. And I was there when we threw $1 billion out the door in 2 months for LBJ. And I followed all the implementation and the rules and the regulations and what happened. And we found over time that the districts were implementing Title I as it was envisioned in the law, and gradually it increased, and somewhere near a decade they were getting close to what they were supposed to be doing back in 1965. So we actually published in 1978 and said, you know, they're pretty much where they should be according to what people thought in 1965. But in 1965, I mean, I was a special assistant to the director, and I got a call from some reporter in Louisiana. They used Title I money to build swimming pools and in wealthy areas. Moreover, the swimming pools were strictly segregated, and what are you going to do about this? And Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, rented tuxedos for the students using Title I money. What are you going to do about that? And so it was a crisis a day coming in, and it was pretty badly implemented, and we estimated something like a third of the money just went to the wrong kids for the wrong things, but over time it got better. So that indicates you need to follow this. One of my thoughts on this predicament is that the Stanford GSE commitment to partnerships with local school districts would really enable us to get into depth on this. I don't know how you get. Not sure how you get representative sample data. With states, there's only 50 of them, but with districts, there's 1,000 of them. So some in-depth analysis would be needed for this as well. So this is really pretty urgently needed. Finally, I'll show you New York under Bloomberg. We're watching this with interest. New York under Bloomberg was like we were, as I understand it. They essentially ran their system just off of tests in terms of accountability and how schools were doing. That was 85%, I think I read. I'm not real in depth on that. But they now have their pilot for things they're looking at, and data they're trying to get from their schools. And I thought, these are some of the things that are being bandied about in California as well and other states. So I thought some of these would be interesting for you to see. Measures of the quality of the student classwork, and looking at projects, research papers, extended essays. I mean, this is, you're seeing the breakdown, I think, of the, at least in the short run, of the hegemony of the closed-end moldable choice test, which has been used to date. California spends about $12 per pupil on testing. Now, if you have a $60 billion budget, that isn't going to be much money. Smarter Balanced will go up to about $23. Still not a huge amount of money. And so, but these kinds of efforts, I think, will be more. And I think number 2 means they'll look at some grades. And then the third bullet there are things that are, some of those are in our 8 state priorities, student engagement, and so on, but others are less clear. And then, as you know, all of a sudden the 4th bullet is coming up, that the real success in college and comes, which in post-secondary education, career tech, has come from things that aren't measured strictly by test scores. And so Carol Dweck talks about mindsets, and then you hear a lot about persistence, ability to work in teams. Some of our performance exams may have some collaborative aspects to it, but you hear more and more talk about measuring that collaboration. That's part of the Common Core. Effective communication, speaking and listening is part of the Common Core. As far as I can tell, we aren't doing a whole lot about that in our plans, but it's there. And then this elusive thing called grit, that, it takes grit to get through high school and post-secondary education in a successful way. I talked to Rich Shavelson about this, and I said, well, how do I measure this? And he said, you might be able to measure it in some way, but I have no idea how you'd measure changes. So if you're trying to intervene to get more of what John Wayne movie, True Grit, I don't know how to do it. So these are the latest things. And again, we're off in a world here of high aspiration, but not clear technology on how to do it. So finally, 2 summative slides, and then we'll open to discussion. On the left has been the compliance model of California. We have been the land of categorical programs. Find a problem, and we earmarked a categorical program. So we had, about 48 of these categorical earmarks. Alice Waters from Chez Panisse up in Berkeley, she walked into Schwarzenegger's office and sold him on school gardens, and so we got a categorical program for school gardens. The legislature in 2006, the last time we had any money, they passed 22 new categorical programs. So, we saw a problem at the state level. We earmarked funds. We got some bureaucrats in the state ed department to come up with regs, and then we approved applications, and then we monitored school site performance and with audits and compliance reviews, and we chopped the system up into, at that time, 48 categories. So now it's much more along this line. Now, people will argue, local school boards have been, there's an old saying that in the beginning God created monkeys and then he created local school board members. But, so there's been, much aspirations about that. We have... There are 95,000 elected school board members in America. We have 5,500, I believe. So this model then, we wrote in a lot of community involvement in terms of encouraging school districts to do it, is a different one. And then that then is a reverse here. And so how does this, if these are being flipped, research question is, how is that going? That model on the empowerment model is a very different approach for getting data. We had pretty good data in some of these categoricals in terms of audits and stuff. These processes are harder to understand and to measure. And then lastly, if we're to do Common Core, we have, those of you interested, there's a new planning guide out called Leadership Planning Guide, Common Core State Standards from the California County Superintendents of Education. And these are the components for implementing Common Core. You may recall I gave an earlier talk on the state components of this. We've done a lot of the state policy I talked about a year ago. And so now it's a lot of the local level to do. And so each of these are areas for implementation research in terms of design and what works and how far along we are. And this is the kind of thing, again, we need in the short run, quickly. How well is the research community set up to give us these things? How are researchers prepared to do this is a question that would help, that state policymakers ask, because these are our questions at this point of transition. And so those are some questions I leave for you. So let me stop there, and so I'm done with my descriptive overview, and now we can take reactions and questions and whatever. Some of you will be elated, and some of you will remember what Harry Truman, they used to call him, give him hell Harry, and he said, I told them the truth and they thought it was hell. And so some people will react that way. Others will react that this is really the way to be going, and we ought to be moving forward into the 21st century with these new concepts. So I stop there. Thank you. Mike.
A couple of things. Thank you very much for giving retirement a good name. Joel Bloomberg's education board, Joel Klein, was it?
Yeah.
It looks like the new mayor, if the polls are correct, will do away with what Klein was trying to do in New York. I don't know if that's your impression as well. Second kind of question, I noticed that the West Coast, but including British Columbia, are getting together on environmental questions and coordinating some of their work, looking for something added because of that coalition. So I'm beginning to wonder if we can do something like this in education. How far along has Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, what is going on in New York? In other words, get a core of multiple governance levels to work together and add to one another's strength.
Yeah, that's a good question. Both. I don't know a lot about New York. I mean, you know, we get snippets in the New York Times. That's all I get. My guess is that de Blasio, if when he's elected, will not do away with everything, and he'll cut off some of the rougher edges. But I can't really speculate on that. I think it's interesting. I put the pilot stuff in there from New York to indicate there's some anticipation of different ways of thinking there, and that seemed to be part of it. But I don't think they'll dismantle everything that Bloomberg did. On the 50 state angle, it's been less than I thought. When the former state board approved the Common Core standards in July 2010, and when I got in 2011 in January, I thought, well, we're a common market of 45, 46 states. All of a sudden, we'll be sharing a lot more information. It's been less than I thought it would be, and it's been largely things posted on the web without a lot of ability to talk them through in much of any way. And so there is, you know, we changed our whole, California used to adopt textbooks. And in the old days, we bought the plates and actually printed them. and the board traditionally adopted 3 to 7 textbooks. Well, the new law changed that entirely. We're like a Consumer Reports division. We will recommend textbooks to people, like Consumer Reports would recommend certain cars as in their club being better, but locals can adopt Common Core materials from other states or cities. New York City did quite a bit of early and quick implementation of Common Core. So, but I haven't, most of the PS districts have been following whatever we've been doing at the state level in endorsing things. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of that bubbling up locally either. So I think there's some learning going on, but it's not that great. I don't see any organization of researchers working on this that is nationwide. There's a woman at George Washington University that runs periodic meetings, which I've appeared at, and I sort of tell her the very partial, unrepresentative information and impressions I have. I don't, that shouldn't pass for research, and she gets that from other states, and then they write up reports. But when we had the last implementation of the standards, I was part of a group called the Consortium for Policy Research and Education, known as CPRE, which still exists, led by Susan Furman, now president of the Columbia Teachers College. We followed in depth for a decade 10 states on the implementation of those standards. I remember a report I co-wrote called Persistence and Change. They were persisting with doing the standards, not throwing them away, and that persistence has, I think paid off in some ways, and certainly got those policies more in place, and they were adapting them as they went along, and we were chronicling that. But I see no similar organization out there doing this, nor anybody offering the money to do it. So far, there's been nobody stepping up on this. We were a nationally funded research center, and they have redone those research charges for those national research centers, so none of them has this kind of a policy focus that we had in
California. Are there many Palo Altos that are continuing with the old system for another year?
Well, that's not clear what they're doing. I know one of their board members wants to give the old test.
I think that passed the board meeting.
Okay, it did. All right. Yeah. No, I haven't. I was stunned when I saw that. I haven't heard of anybody else doing it. All I've heard is overwhelming approval that we don't want to be schizophrenic. We want to move forward with a field test assessment for Smarter Balanced and not give the old CST. And so, yeah, I was surprised to see that, and that was one of the leading things the teachers asked us for was let us move on, or forget about moving on, but have your assessment going in towards whatever you're doing in the forward. So I don't know what the rationale for that. It was posed that they need the data, they say, from the assessment, so they have the right to buy it.
Hi, Mike. Thank you. As you know, and as we've talked about, I'm most worried about the piece around professional development and the capacity for professional development. And in an earlier standards era, the state put money into the subject matter projects. And David Cohen and Heather Hill wrote a nice book about that, the Learning Policy book, where they looked at both the lack of teachers' opportunities to learn about the new policy and standards, and then some professional development that did have impact on teachers, particularly their content knowledge in mathematics. Given this move towards local control, what do you see as the state's role in sort of guiding the work around professional development for the Common Core?
Right. The subject matter projects were state categorical earmarks, and so that they're in jeopardy. And really, I think that the state's role is really at information, recommendations, information transfer at this point. We are not attempting to deliver in-depth staff development through some central state developmental mechanism, and I don't see that likely to happen. So, then how will districts band together? Mike was suggesting that kind of thing. I know the Silicon Valley Community Foundation has been forming partnerships among districts and funding them to work collaboratively on this. We have an outrageous number of districts in Santa Clara County. The City of San Jose has 19, including 2 that have 1 school in them. So it's more putting together local district collaborations. So the whole thing is shifting down, shifting quickly, and I think part of your concern is the infrastructure to maximize this local flexibility isn't really there, as you're shaking your head yes, and you're out there. But at this point, I don't see it as something we'll be doing quickly.
We're not going to fight over the mic. We'll share. So, Mike, thank you for your presentation. It was very illuminating. I think the question about local capacity actually pervades much of the plan. Mm-hmm. And the question that I have is, when you have these 8 performance areas, has the board or has the state legislature given any thought to what the quality standards are for each of those 8 that must be met? Or are each of the local accountability plans supposed to not only define their own plan, but also define their own evaluative criteria, which kind of sounds like wolf in the henhouse?
Right. We will define the 8. The 8, that will be, and the board is charged with doing that. We have a deadline of July 2015. So we will define those. And there'll be, some kind of state, I guess it would be more like a dashboard rather than a single API that we would present on these. And then we could attach various accountability consequences to some of them more than others. Achievement might count more than parent involvement or something in the setup. So yes, we'll do that. I suspect we'll do them before July 2015. So that won't be left to chance, and there is specific legislation requiring the board to do this. That I think is something that we will be spending a lot of time on in the future.
So, Mike, what stands out is the complete incoherence of this plan from a policy standpoint. You decentralize funding, presumably. You eliminate accountability, so you don't know what the local districts are doing.
Not eliminate it, suspend it.
Suspension in California. And at the same time, you get rid of many categoricals, but you require districts to have plans of how they spend all their money according to these 8 categories. They can't observe the outcomes of these categories at this point in time because everything is suspended. How would the state of California think that that's going to advantage its students?
Well, first of all, we're not going to require them to spend the money in the 8 categories strictly. We're not approving their plan. So we're the checking that will be done, it doesn't go up to the state level. So the checking that will be done is something like your income tax, where if you didn't fill in the right parts or you computed it wrong, you get a quick letter from the IRS about you didn't fill out this blank. So they are to make the decisions. So the rationale is something similar to what Margaret Thatcher did. She said we need to get the government out of specifying how you do things and hold them accountable for the what. So the what will be defined around the 8 state priorities. We're going through an interregnum of testing now, so I don't see how you could do accountability on a field test. And even the Secretary of Education has said states that do field testing of either Park or Smarter Balance don't have to report their scores to the parents or to the public, or do they need to be computed, the U.S. Secretary. So he agrees with this. So we're in a transition period. So I think you're imputing what's going on in a transition period to what is a policy. But it's basically that we had too much how and not enough on sophisticated and moldable measures of what. We had an index with just a few things in it. So I think it's you're going to. I would urge you to hold your fire, and that the rationale is the how and what rationale. I tell this favorite story of in 1975 when I got up there in Sacramento. I was 35, Governor Brown was 35, Gray Davis, the governor, was 35, and Bill Honey was 35. And we were all single, and we used to go to bars, and we'd say how, well, we got the answers, those old people don't know squat, you know. And now, the same crowd is 75, and we proceed with humility. And so that we don't have the answers. I think there's a realization that the state is big, complex. Trying to detail it from Sacramento is extremely hard and has unintended consequences. And so we're now proceeding with more humility and getting out of their face on how, and that would include teacher staff development run by UC, and we're formulating the what on a more speculative, on a basis that involves some speculation as to what we're coming up with. I think the idea of only tests as accountability and moldable choice closed-end tests, it couldn't last forever. There had to be a period where you were going to move off from that, and we're in that transition period.
I'm not quite sure how to ask this, because then once I came up with the question, I realized it didn't quite make sense, but I'll ask it anyway. So some schools are having trouble right now, and is there any way to, or how is the board thinking about the students who are in those schools and this kind of 5-year hiatus for knowing if those schools are providing even the basic adequacy of educational outcomes for them?
Yeah, we're still in under AYP, so we're still part of that system. So that triggers schools falling into AYP, and then we have tracks of how long they've been in AYP, cohort measures. So we're actually continuing to work with that system. But those interventions, as you know, have never been real powerful anyway. And essentially, at this point, we're still defining, quote, corrective action. So it's the NCLB process would be my only answer, and I don't think that does much. So I think it's if you transit, there's as you well know, there's benefits and costs of any policy, and as you transist to what we think is a more and better policy, there's going to be problems in the interregnum. So that's I think part of what we weren't doing much to improve those schools under the old system. So now we're hopeful that the new system will do more.
Smaller scale school improvement that are being scaled up now in states that have waivers, but without money.
Thank you for your talk, Mike. I realize I'm not in Virginia anymore. This is an incredibly ambitious program statewide, and California is a big state. So a couple of questions. One is there interest in what's going on here at a national level? And if there is, do you think that there's a good possibility for funding from IES?
I don't know about IES, but we are getting a tremendous uptake of foundations in this. The Gates Foundation left California in disgust in 2010 and has returned and hired 2 people just to make grants in California. Their view is that we're one of the most promising states to implement Common Core. Part of that is because we're not caught with policy overload. I'd hate to be doing this and also doing teacher evaluation policies for 310,000 teachers. That's what New York and others are undergoing. I believe in something called policy overload. This may be overload, but if you loaded that on top, I think you'd be in real trouble. And so there are states that are wavering on Common Core, and then there's some that are, I think, in somewhat of overload. And then there's those that are rushing too fast. A lot of the discussion here has been it's too slow, but then I think New York's getting in trouble because they're going too fast. I think they could, they could delay a year and it wouldn't hurt them that much. So the national foundations are re-entering, and the local foundations have been banding together and giving money for Common Core at a very high rate. I can't take money, and the governor's office doesn't receive money, but I can broker money. I can literally call up foundations, and we can raise hundreds of thousands in 3 phone calls, or sometimes millions. We need something to help us with that. Okay, we'll send you.
Okay, well, you seem
we
to be
get
talking-
officers' grants immediately, and then we get more money later. So we are. This whole thing, this planning guide, was done with some quickie foundation money.
Well, you're talking about money for implementation, which I think is obviously very important, but what about money for research?
Oh, I haven't heard anything about that. No, nothing.
That's what I thought you said earlier.
And I haven't heard anything from IES either. We don't have Race to the Top for K-12. We have it for early childhood. We don't have an NCLB waiver. Arnie Duncan sent me a letter at 11 a.m. this morning saying because of our testing programs, he's going to threatening with withholding billions of dollars from the state of California, and because we're not going to give the CST test. So I can't imagine IES. I don't even think about them. Washington, we're not. The foundations love us, and the federal government hates us. Yeah.
I came out here in 1998 to work with the School Business Partnership. They were going to give computers to a variety of districts. And, of course, what we found within about 3 weeks is that the dysfunctional districts put the computers in the closet, and the functional districts distributed them. So I guess my question is anybody looking at what we know already, which is that there are a lot of dysfunctional districts? How are they going to become functional? Could the university play a role in that? Could you just comment on what you're thinking about?
You mean functional in technology or functionally
functional
overall?
Period. Overall.
Overall, okay. Well, the state response would have to be that, what I've laid out today will lead to higher functioning, albeit with some interregnum where it drifts a little bit as we put something new in. My hope on the technology is that part of it is driven by assessment. And the schools like what they hear about Smarter Balanced. They have already tried out some of the items. They're enthusiastic about it, and they realize that it takes more technology. So you can give a test with a lot less technology than you can teaching with technology, which was really what you were implying. Smarter Balanced is also providing help on instruction, and so I think that area that's just an area I mentioned on the technology, but I don't know how to. There's not all the answers out there, and the state role. Again, I go back to humility. Your question implies that I have some magical powers or something to improve all these schools. And if I did, I would have done it by now at age 75. And so we're proceeding with what we think is the best policy we know at this point. So humility is, I don't know how to do it, and I'm not sure the state can do it. And our gamble is that more locals will do it if we put the pressure on them and give them some flexibility to do it. So, I mean, we maybe had 5 bills to stop dropouts. Categorical programs of 50 million, 80 million. It's all gone down the drain. I mean, you don't have a state categorical program and stop dropouts. And so I've witnessed all these, and so we're going to try a new approach. Yeah.
So I actually have to say I like the idea of acknowledging that centralized control from Sacramento, especially in a state as large as California, is probably not a good idea. So I think I see a small glimmer of sunshine here, which is I think I hear the possibility that CDE is no longer going to be relevant. Is that right?
Well, they will. We have cleaned out 2 floors of audit people and green eye shade types up there, and so they're no longer as intensively in the compliance business. Although our friends in Washington, they're really hot for compliance, and so we have still people doing that. But so CDE is more of an information transfer operation. They're never going to have people that can go out and do this and be on the ground to improve schools. That's not really what their function will be. So yeah, they will be less directive and more informative. And yeah, there is a big change in their role. And moreover, we have programs in the bill to have other educators who have been successful help districts, and they would not be employed by CDE. So there's a group called FICMAT that helps districts that have been in trouble with their budgets, where they get so out of sorts. So that's a non-governmental, non-profit agency. So we're offloading a lot of the technical assistance to non-government, non-profit agencies that will be formed. So there's definitely a new view on CDE and their role, and so that glimmer, I think, has some realization to it.
Mike, in this approach going forward, if changes are needed or modifications, additions, things to improve it, what's the mechanism? It doesn't sound that research, or at least systematic research, is playing a part. What kind of feedback? How do changes get registered, or if you're approaching this with humility and so on? So I assume that you realize that this is not a perfect approach at this point. So if it needs to be altered or enhanced or added, how would that happen? Through whom? By what information? What kind of feedback, and so on?
Yeah. Well, we welcome research, but assuming that will be limited, it happens through systematic verbal meetings where you go out, have people, and that's another role of CDE. You go out and listen, and you ask questions, and you listen, and then you come back. Now, you try and get some kind of group. I'm not going to use the word representative sample, but we could use even some of that representative sampling that people would do. So it's really feedback that you get through existing consultative mechanisms that are also being expanded. We rely a lot on county offices of education. So people wonder what they do, and one of the things they do, like this thing that came from Sacramento County, actually, is we work through county offices to go out and talk to their school districts and then talk to us. So we don't have field offices, but we use the county offices for that purpose. They are happy to be used for that purpose. They have funding on their own base that goes back to when they had property tax. They actually get allocations from the state. So that's one. And then we listen to all of the groups. We're trying to get much more parent involvement. I think I can find out what superintendents think. And then we convene groups of principals. The teachers are a lot of people, but, they have an association called CTA. They talk to us.
In the 80s, we had a mentor-teacher program in this state.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us, Larry Cuban, myself, brought the mentor teachers together so that they can talk about what they were doing, try out ideas on their own. So I wonder if some of these facilitators who are in the districts already might be given a boost by getting together and sharing ideas.
Yeah, I don't know who those facilitators would exactly be. The mentor-teacher program ended
Somebody from the university?
years ago. That's another problem with categoricals. These programs end and then away go the mentor-teachers. We had a beginning teacher induction program called BITSA. That bit the dust too. So that one's fading away. So unless you have local commitment to these things, they are propped up by state money and then go away. We could, but it's a good point that how do we get more systematic feedback than we've been getting now? I think that's a really good suggestion. And it's so big and so diverse. You never know what. There's whole areas like Riverside and San Bernardino County. I don't know what the hell's going on down there. They're huge. There has to be something that's a bit more systematic in this regard. And this is a first draft, and we will be, of course, changing it over time. I don't think that if this governor is reelected, don't look for a re-centralization at the state level. They tried to do that in the legislature right after they passed all this. They tried a last-minute bill to do some re-centralization, and he vetoed it in that regard.
Mike, I think we're about 20 minutes over time. People still want to ask questions. Hardly
Sure,
anyone's gone. But you know what? You're a busy man.
No, I'm okay. I plan till 2 o'clock. So
okay.
So, Mike, one of the things that confuses me is how much is in legislation about what happens and how much is controlled elsewhere. Where do you think that the state board has its greatest leverage? On what aspects of this? Because it sounded like the legislature tied up a whole bunch of things.
Well, they didn't really. They pretty much went along with what the Brown administration wanted. So from that standpoint, they weren't obstreperous. I don't see them as causing a lot of tie-ups. And tie-ups, would be things that would impose state control on the local districts. And moreover, they punted to the state board the local control, the details of the local control accountability program. They punted to us the definition of all of the 8 state priorities. They retreated from trying to take general concepts and trying to specify them. So we do the template for the local control accountability plan. We do the oversight mechanisms of that, of the plan. We do the new accountability program. Right now it's just a statement of priorities, not a program. That was punted to the state board. And textbook adoption, which we no longer do, so materials selection, was delegated to the state board, in the sense, I should say, materials endorsements. They loosened that system up really a whole lot, and said local districts can buy what they want as long as they check for some social criteria about the proper portrayal of minorities and so on, and they're in state law. And so, no, I think it's fairly flexible, and indeed, a lot of the details aren't nailed down. So, I'm not feeling that constrained by them. What struck you as constraining?
Well, the specification, the 8 areas.
Okay, the 8 areas.
Linking, the requirement to link spending to these 8 areas or plans for it. It sounds like that they would have to fill out the IRS forms for these.
Yeah, well, we're going to wait till you see the template. It's going to be a bunch of questions. Right now, it's questions you must ask yourself. So that's different than the IRS, which has you fill out line 49 and so on. It'll be more a process of leading them through how to think about it. So it's structured thinking rather than these are the answers. And so the 8 state priorities are there, but that they can be weighted differently in any way we want. So we could have one at 5% and one at 50%.
In all of your work, then, who helps you? I mean, you're not doing this yourself. Is this where the CDE provides all the guidance?
No, we have our own staff. So the governor abolished the Secretary of Education staff. They had 21 people, not sure what any of them did. And then we picked up some of those positions from them. So the governor runs his entire education advising operation for K-12 through California State U through the State Board of Education. So the executive director of the State Board of Education, Karen Staff Walders, is also special advisor to Governor Brown. She's in his weekly staff meetings. So we have quite a bit of staff, not quite a bit, but some staff, substantial staff, and we get all kinds of volunteers and task forces. We're announcing a new task force on special education. What a mess that is. Which was funded by 3 California foundations. And we're going to have them work on rethinking special ed, which I didn't mention here this morning because we don't really have a plan. So we also use a lot of those people. And we have a group called the Instructional Quality Commission, headed by Bill Honig, which works on the curricular frameworks and professional development modules and of course, instructional materials. They work very hard. Honig works full-time for nothing. These are real Jerry Brown deals. I get $300 a month. Sue Burr, the former executive director, he appointed her to the board. He used to pay her $150,000. Now he pays her $300 a month and still has her working just as hard. So there are some volunteers, and we do rely on CDE staff for some things. Yes, their assessment director, Deb Sigmund's, for example, quite influential and quite, I think, capable. So, yes, we do draw them in, and they do help on things. But the governor is, really influencing education through his state board. And the California State Board, unlike most states, is the state education agency. So we are the body that gets and has to receive and approve all federal funding. That gets you into absolutely everything. And since the state board and the governor are linked, then we are able, through him, to do a whole lot. So he uses the state education agency, the state board, that is there. And, I talk with him on the telephone at least 3 times a week, and sometimes 5 times. So, it's a sort of strange, it's not a military organized operation in terms of how it operates. But CDE is certainly in the mix, and their problem is their salaries are so low. The good people leave for local districts, and the people they want to get from local districts won't come because they're going to take a pay cut of about 40% or so to come from a local district. So state services really cannot compete with any local school district at this point.